And Jim Wasserbauer. They're from the Payne Firm. We have had environmental studies done on 2 pieces of property that are proposed purchases for Three Rivers if the bond issue passes on May 4th. So they're here to just give a summary of those environmental findings, and then I believe to also answer any questions that you might have. So thank you very much for being here, Don and Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for having us tonight. Jim and I have worked together at the Payne Firm I've been there forever, and Jim about 15, 16 years. We were engaged initially in 2004 when the school district started looking for potential school sites, which included the Cooper Road property. That started with a Phase 1 environmental assessment in 2004. A Phase 1 environmental assessment is a very thorough examination of all of the environmental information that you can find on a property. We look at old aerial photographs and maps, any government records we can find. We interview the owners of the property. We obviously do a detailed inspection of the property. At that time, there were 2 issues that we identified for as recognized environmental conditions, is what the industry practice terminology is for a potential issue of concern. Those issues involve some petroleum staining around some above-ground storage tanks on the shunt property. Those were associated with the garage. These are above-ground tanks like you might see at any kind of maintenance garage. There was some just kind of typical oil staining on the soil surface around those. The other concern we identified was the Chevron facility across the river and releases that they'd had to the environment and groundwater there. We did a lot of research on those. And Jim, if you don't mind, Jim was following that all along as a representative of the water board here. And so he can provide you all the details and the reports and things we reviewed to reach a determination at that time that there had not been impact to the potential school property.
Well, as you know, the Chevron property, it became a refinery. It operated, started back in 1931 and actually ended its operations when Chevron took over in 85, and then Chevron closed the facility and started remedial action in 1986. So at that time, they had identified some soil and groundwater contamination on the Chevron property with respect to leaks and releases, and have been actively engaged by the federal EPA Region 5 in cleaning up that property. With respect to the Cleves Waterworks, we initially had an old well field down there which supplied the Hooven and the village of Cleves with our drinking water. There was a release from a pipeline in the Miami River that subsequently impacted some soils in and around the island that sits out in the middle of the river when you go across the bridge. Chevron implemented a remedial action with soil vapor extraction and groundwater extraction to clean up that site, and that commenced probably in the mid-90s and went all the way up through 2001, where they began to just monitor residual effects and actually brought the contamination that was there at that island below the MCLs, or maximum contaminant drinking level standards, which are quite low. With respect to that, with respect to the well field, we monitored the situation from the waterworks perspective, and at that time there was the well field operated from 1950 all the way up to 2001. The reason why it was closed and relocated was that the agency would not allow the waterworks to expand with any more production wells, and hence it kind of limited our capacity to provide water and services for the communities that we serviced. So with that, we reached a settlement with Chevron, and Chevron helped us relocate out to the new Kilby Road facility, where we now provide or get our drinking water from. Once they closed the well field, the wells that potentially maybe influenced any contamination coming off the Chevron property were now gone, and the site returned back to its natural flow, which is to the south-southwest, and hence we did some studies in 2001 which indicated no contamination of the wells or of the water beneath the well field at any time. So from that, they are still actively engaged in and in the final stages of their final remediation at the Chevron property. And based on our current studies that we've done, looking at all the studies that the EPA and Chevron have done, we believe that the groundwater issue beneath the proposed site is fine and hasn't been impacted based on those studies.
Great, thank you, Jim. The school district then engaged us in January of this year to do another phase 1 environmental assessment. They have a shelf life of just over a year, so as this became selected as more the final site, we did another phase 1 environmental assessment, which was going back through all those records again, rechecking all the EPA files, re-interviewing the owners, and walking the site again, and again for the purpose of identifying things that might be a potential recognized environmental condition. With the research we've done with the well field issue and the Chevron releases, we determined that that was not a potential impact to the property, so that one was taken out of our list of concerns. We still observe the petroleum staining at the base of these above ground storage tanks located near the Shunk maintenance garage. In addition, between the time of our first report and 2010, there had been filling done on the property and regrading, bringing the site out of the floodplain. When there's dirt, which is what was brought onto the property, like in that situation, that's typically a recognized environmental condition. So the two recognized environmental conditions we had in our 2010 report were the petroleum staining around the above ground storage tanks and also the fill material that had been brought onto the property. Our research into the origin of the fill material, some of it had been regraded from the southwest corner of the site. Others had been brought from the Schweitzer property to the south, all undeveloped areas, so we didn't really have any concerns over the fill, but we did go ahead and sample it anyway. And that leads us to the phase 2 investigation that we performed on the property, which is defined as actual physical sampling of the soil on the potential school property. That involves sampling around the above ground tanks, and it also involves sampling the fill material. We selected the locations based on areas where we thought we were most likely to find something. We tested for the full suite of contaminants that you would expect from those kind of materials. And the results of those findings were, and I know our report has been made available, was there is petroleum staining around the tanks that is above a residential action level, which is what we compared everything to as we got the data. Those were the only exceedances. We would describe that as a very typical and manageable situation around the above ground storage tanks, that if that facility were decommissioned, you would scoop up a foot or two of soil in a very small area, haul it away, and then the issue is solved. So that's really the results of our work. Our final conclusions are that no further investigation or remediation is needed at the property, other than removing the petroleum contamination around the above ground tanks. There is some appliances and other things on the property that need to be removed and disposed. We examined those carefully during our phase 2 and don't believe there's any chemical releases from those kind of things. It's really inert kind of materials have been placed in the northwestern part of the property. We also reviewed a lot of the geotechnical reports and things that were done on the property that examined the soils at many, many locations and at deep locations, and no evidence of environmental contamination at those areas either. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions. I know, again, our reports are available and conclude that there's nothing further needs to be done regarding the environmental condition of the property other than what we've discussed. Yes, sir.